This is the DaVinci Resolve Speed Editor from Blackmagic Design. It is basically a small editing keyboard for the cut page of DaVinci Resolve primarily. I posted a short form video about this when I got it, and a lot of people wanted a full video about it, so this is it. I've had it for about 2 weeks, and I've used it for every single video that I've made since the unboxing video of this. So let's talk about it. Firstly, the reason why I got the Speed Editor isn't because I'm an editor and I want to speed up my editing workflow. Yes, I do want to speed up my editing workflow, but the main reason that I got it is because it came with DaVinci Resolve Studio. So it was actually barely more expensive to buy this than to just buy the software. In Australia, the software is $495 for DaVinci Resolve Studio. I paid $575 for this. If you include shipping, I paid $90 more than it would cost to just get the software license. And I also got this, and I think this is worth more than $90. So for me, I think it was sort of worth it to get the Speed Editor rather than just buying the software, because I also get this sort of extra hardware. Now at the end, I will talk about the editor's keyboard, which actually has a lot of similarity to this, but we've got to go through this device first. So what you get in the box: the DaVinci Resolve Speed Editor. Obviously, DaVinci Resolve Studio, there's just a card in here that has your license key on it. You can have the license active on up to 2 devices at a time. So if you have 2 PCs or a laptop and a desktop or something like that, you can have Studio on both of your devices. I currently only have it on one. Also, it comes with a USB-C to C cable. Now, this one works fine. Other cables also work fine. I have tested another cable and it works just as fine. So you don't need this specific cable, it's just USB-C. And the USB-C is to charge and connect, because it does have Bluetooth connectivity, so you don't have to have it plugged in. It also didn't come with a physical manual. I mean, like, I don't really care about that, but just might be a thing to note. You have to like go to the website and download the digital manual. There's just a QR code on one of the documents in the box. So the build quality of the Speed Editor is pretty good. Like, it is plastic, but it's very stiff. It's not gonna flex at all. It doesn't really move. It's very solid, but it's also quite light. So I think they do sort of advertise it as like travel friendly. Like, you could just put this in a backpack and go if you need to for whatever reason. But it is very solid. The keys feel like just linear mechanical switches, like they're red switches or something like that. They feel decent. They're obviously nothing special, but they're mechanical keys. So if you have a mechanical keyboard, you're gonna sort of know what they feel like. The one thing I did notice is the stop play button seems to have a little bit of a click to it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a different switch or it just happens to be like that, or maybe there's something wrong with mine. I don't know. It has Bluetooth built in, so you can just Bluetooth it to your computer. And as I mentioned before, it has that USB-C port right here. You've also got, probably the most interesting thing is the scroll wheel, jog wheel, search dial, whatever you want to call it. It basically is a free spinning wheel on a bearing, so it just sort of goes, it'll do a few laps and then sort of slow down and stop. It does have an indent in the top of the scroll wheel, which is nice, and then rubber around the outside. So, you know, you never really have issues with grip. Even if you miss the indent with your finger, you can still spin it a fair bit if you have to like scrub pretty fast through the timeline. But we'll talk about sort of how that works as well when we get to actually using it. On the bottom, it does have just sort of like thin rubber feet on both ends. It's just the entire length of the device, so you know, it's not going to slide around. I haven't had any issues with it moving on my desk pad, and it like, not that I use it on just the bare wood of my desk, but it's fine on that as well. So some of the keys have LEDs underneath them, so basically that means that if it's toggled on or off, you'll know. I'm just going to plug it in now, because it does actually work a bit better with the USB plugged in compared to with Bluetooth, and I will talk about sort of what that actually means later. But I'm also just going to quickly rearrange my desk so I can get my keyboard out here, because this is actually how I edit when I'm using this. I have the Speed Editor in the middle, the keyboard off to the side, then I have my mouse off to the other side if I need to use all 3, which I usually do to some degree. Anyway, here on the screen we just have some footage for the next YouTube video that'll be coming out next week, and I'm basically just going to go through and show you how everything on here works, and hopefully also try and maybe make some selects for that video. So firstly, we're going to go over the scroll wheel and the different behaviors that it has. Okay, so the first function and the most common function of the scroll wheel is going to be the jog function, which basically means as as fast as you scroll it is as fast as it'll go through. So if you want to go really slowly frame by frame, you can. If you want to just sort of send it, it'll, you know, skip through. But if you have a really good machine and it's going really well, or the footage is really easy to deal with by the computer, then you could probably just do it fast and it'll actually just scrub through really fast without it skipping too many frames. But this is the one that I use the most and the one that most people would probably use the most as well. And with the jog mode, according to the DaVinci Resolve website, if you do a half turn, that'll be 30 frames. Now we'll go over to the left mode, and as you can see, the light changes on that when we select that. This is the shuttle mode. So if it's straight up and down, it's not going to do anything. If we start tilting it to the side, it's going to start playing at normal speed, and we start tilting it more, it's going to start playing at double speed. And then the more we turn it, the faster it's going to play. So if I just sort of leave it there, it's just going to play really fast. Now, the computer's kind of struggling playing it. And then same thing with backwards. It's going backwards because it's slightly to the left. And so you can just sort of play it at different speeds by tilting that wheel. Because the wheel doesn't have much resistance, if you let it go, it can move a little bit if you don't let it go right. Or if you are trying to hold it there and you don't have tension on it, it can sort of move on its own a little bit. So I don't really use the shuttle mode too much. But then when we go to the scroll mode, scroll is pretty much exactly what you sound. It just goes a lot faster. And basically how it works is half a turn is 30 seconds. So it should be roughly 30 times faster. So if you do need to get from one end of your timeline to the other end, or if you have like a long clip, if you want to get from one end to the other, you can scroll through that really quick, then change back over to jog to be a bit more refined. And then moving up on the speed editor, we have the source and timeline buttons. And these are good, obviously, to switch between your source and your timeline. But one thing that happens with this source button is, as you can see on the screen right here, we have all these sort of what look like cuts in the source. Now this is the source tape, which is all of the clips in the media pool, or at least in the bin that they're in. So this is one clip, and as I keep scrolling through, I'm gonna cut and it'll just automatically go to the next one. So this can be good if you just wanna see all your clips and you wanna scroll through them, get your in and out points and just sort of add them in as you go. And then if you wanna look at your timeline, let's maybe add that in, and then let's add another one, add that in, and then I'm gonna switch over to my timeline, and then I can then see my timeline, which just has the clips that I just added. And back to the source tape here, and now as you can see, I've got some in and out points for this clip here. So I click the in and out button, and then I'm gonna click append, which will then add everything between that in and out point to the timeline. And there's a bunch of different ways to add things like that. Append is just add it to the end. You can, for example, place on top. So let's say I scroll through to find, let's say I like this clip. I'm gonna go in, scroll through that a little bit, out, and then I'm gonna place it on top. But because I was at the end of the timeline, because my playhead was at the end of the timeline, it's just gonna add it at the end because there was nothing for it to go on top of. But if I maybe scroll back to here, then go back to my source, and then hit place on top, it's gonna add that on top of the other clip. You know, makes sense. And as you can see, every time I insert a new clip, it stays on the source tape. So I don't have to keep switching back and forth between the timeline and the source. I can just keep on the source and just add stuff to the timeline and just keep going through it. And then we can come back to the timeline later. But the next one we're gonna go through is the smart insert, which is pretty much exactly what you'd think. Let's get an in and out point here, in, out there. I will go to my timeline and go back a bit so I can sort of show you. Now I'm not actually gonna go to the edit point because I'm gonna show you how this sort of works. And then if we go back to the source, we've got it in and out points and hit smart insert. As you can see there, it didn't smart insert where the playhead was, it inserted on the nearest edit point. I think that's why they call it smart insert, because it inserts where there's an edit point, not where the playhead is. I think that's how it works. And then it just sort of ripples the timeline ahead, so it pushes everything out of the way. Next one we've got here are source and ripple overwrite. So if I hit ripple overwrite, it's going to replace the clip that was on the timeline with this new clip, and it's going to ripple the timeline to fit that new clip, whatever the duration is. And then we can do the same thing with source overwrite. We're going to test this. I actually don't know what source overwrite does. So source overwrite seems to add the clip onto whatever from that clip is already in the timeline. That's what I've gathered from that. And then the last one in this little section is the close-up. So if we hit close-up, it actually just duplicates that clip and zooms in a little bit. So it just sort of makes a bit of a punch in. So if I go to my timeline, you can see that one is now zoomed in. And then if I actually delete that. The exact same clip at the same time, it's just a bit zoomed out. Okay, and the next one we have is this area up the top. Obviously you got your full view, which is going to do exactly what you expect. You have your audio level, which is, if you hold that, you can actually increase or decrease the audio. You can see the sort of waveforms going up and down there. Now I don't like doing this because you can't actually control the actual level of it. You can't say, I want it to be at this many dB. It's more just, maybe if it's too loud or too quiet and you just want to be able to hear it, you can adjust it, and then you can actually set the actual level what you want it later. So that's there. We got the sync bin, which will open up the sync bin. So if you do have multiple cameras that you can sync together, either by timecode or waveform, you can do that. That'll open that. And then you can sort of, you know, paint it on like that using the multicam buttons, which I'm not going to talk about a whole lot because I don't really do much multicam stuff, but it is there. That's how that works. You got escape, which will, you know, escape if you're, for example, in full view. It'll escape. So we can add a transition, but I had no transitions selected. So, you know, you've got different transitions down the bottom here. So if you hold transition, you can then select what kind of transition you want. So let's do a cross dissolve. It's not wanting to put that there. I don't know why. You can also select which type of transition you want here. If you want to do a cut, a dissolve, or a smooth cut, that also should work. I don't know why it's not right now. And then to some more useful ones, at least for me, you have your split, which let's say we want to make a cut here and we want to delete this last part. I can go split, which will just make a cut in that clip. Then I can go ripple delete and it'll just get rid of it, move the timeline across. Very useful. Between them, then you also have your snap, which just turns on your snapping, which doesn't work quite the same as snapping normally if you're using a mouse. What it basically, when you're using the wheel, snapping, it'll like slow down, it'll stop there for a couple of frames, but when you sort of unlock from there, it only moves one frame, whereas if you're using your mouse, okay, I'm here, and then if I unlock it, it jumps like 3 frames. Whereas with here, it'll stay there for a little bit, but then it'll unlock to 1 frame off, which is nice, so you can be a little bit more precise with the wheel. Under the in and out buttons, we have trim in, trim out, which is exactly what you'd expect. It'll take the nearest edit point. If you want to trim in, which will trim the front of the clip. If you want to trim out, it'll take that same edit point. So whichever one the playhead is the closest to, not the clip that you're over. So it'll trim the out point of the clip before that. Whereas let's say if I go closer to the end of the clip here, my in will be the next clips, and then my out will be the clip that I'm on. So it takes the closest edit point, not the clip that you're hovering over. We then have our roll, which again, taking the closest edit point, and then you can basically, you keep everything the same duration and you just move the, basically it's a trim in and trim out at the same time, just moving that edit point across between those 2 clips. And then it'll show you sort of what the new ones are. So if you want to time it with, you know, something going in or out of frame, or if you're doing a match cut or something, that can be kind of useful. You have your slip source button, which is basically moving the clip without moving the edit points. So if I go to my second clip, I'm actually gonna go to this one, slip source here. So the top left is the first frame, the top right is the last frame, and then the bottom left is the last frame of the previous clip, and the bottom right is the first frame of the next clip. So then you can sort of match it up to the frames if you're trying to do match cuts or you're trying to time it with something going in or out of frame. And then slip destination is basically the same thing, but with the next clip. Transition duration, basically just hold that and then you can adjust the duration of your transition. I don't know why I couldn't add transitions before, but I feel like that's simple enough to understand. And then I talked about these buttons already. And then finally, we have our multicam section, which I did use before. So if I go into my sync bin, let's pretend I had 2 cameras here. I don't, but let's pretend I did. And I want to add some camera 1 right here. I'm gonna hold camera 1 and I'm just gonna paint it on the top of there. All right. You can go video only, you can go audio only, you can go live overwrite. I actually don't know what live overwrite does. Anyway, another thing that the multicam buttons do, because if you're not shooting multicam, they kind of don't do much, but they're basically a track selector. So let's say we have, you know, we got these 3 clips stacked on top of each other. Let's get out of the sync bin. So we've got these 3 clips stacked on top of each other. If I want to only adjust the clip in track 2, if I hold 2, you can see that's highlighted on track 2. So then I can maybe go trim in, and then I can trim that. Or if I want to go 3, then I'll hit 3, and then I want to roll that one, even though there's no other clip to roll. So let's go 1 and we'll roll it. So So then we can adjust one. So you can adjust each track using those buttons, which can be helpful if you do have, you know, multiple layers of clips. And as you can see, a lot of these buttons actually have things written on the front of them. And basically that means either holding or double tapping and holding will do sort of a secondary action. So with the full view, if we double tap that, we got review, which will basically do full view and then start playing from the most recent edit point. If you want to add a marker, double click the audio level. If you want to double click and hold, you can adjust the color. If you double click it again, you can, you know, add your details. Obviously you can't type on this, so you're gonna have to go to your keyboard, but it's handy. If we double tap the escape button, we got undo. If we double tap transition, it does nothing apparently. It's meant to add a title, I don't know. Oh, okay, now I can add transition. What? There's some weird things going on. Let's take this clip here, and then I'm gonna go double tap the split button, which is move. And if I want to move whatever clips I have selected, that actually split them first, and then I guess you don't have to split them, hey. By the way, if you click split again on a split in a clip, it just fuses it back together. So move will jump it between edit points. So, you know, if I want to move this clip, I'll hold it and then they'll just sort of swap with the next lot of clips. So if I want to slide this clip across, double tap and hold, and then I can just sort of drag it across. So if you want to move it up to something, or if you want to sort of move it out of the way to add something else that you don't want to like do smart insert or whatever, then you can. For your transitions, let's go back to this transition. I'll adjust it a little bit. So let's say with that, and they're like, okay, I want that to be my new transition duration, double tap. And then if I add another transition, let's see if this works, then it adds it at the same duration. Oh yeah, and I missed this one too. If you double tap and hold the snap button, you can also adjust the size of your viewer. So, you know, if you do that, and then let's actually just go back to where we did this close up. Now, which one was the close up? Was this a close up? Let's say this was a close up. We added a close up there, right? So we got a close up, and then if we want to adjust the Y position, then we hold the button and then we can just sort of scroll it up or down if you need to frame it a certain way. There is no X position, so you can't move it left or right. You'd have to do that in the edit page. All right, so now let's get off the cut page and we're gonna go to the edit page. And we're just gonna look at this mess of a timeline that we have because I haven't actually been doing anything because I've been focusing on actually just trying to show you the buttons, not actually do anything good with it. But basically we're just gonna quickly go through what does and doesn't work because this is designed for the cut page, so not everything works on the other pages. Now the scroll wheel works the same. Shuttle, jog, scroll, all work the same. Very nice. Source and timeline works almost the same, but you don't have that source tape. So you're only gonna go to the source that you have selected, but you know, you can easily switch back to the timeline. Same thing, like let's say if I go to my source, I wanna do my in and out points, then I can still, you know, I can append, I can, you know, I'll go back to my timeline here. Let's go back here, source, and then let's go smart insert. So that's sort of interesting how it'll do the smart insert, but it won't find that nearest edit point. It'll just insert it where the playhead is. So that's sort of one of the differences between the cut page and the edit page is the edit page would just sort of take everything literally, whereas the cut page, it knows what it's trying to do and it'll go by the edit points, not by the playhead. But you know, it's still quite useful and it's easy enough to just get to, you know, the edit point between the clips if you want to insert something. So it's not a huge deal, it's just a little bit more work. The trim buttons work pretty much the same as well, except, no, yeah, pretty much the same. Roll, yeah, let's go back to a clip that are actually like up against each other. Let's roll, roll does the same, slide, the same. Slip destination doesn't do anything for some reason, but slip source does. And one thing also that is kind of useful for using the speed editor, because you don't have a mouse and you can't select anything. Whereas on the cut page, you don't really need to select things because it's whatever the playhead's on or the edit point that's closest to it, it'll just use that. Or you can use the, you know, the multicam buttons, which by the way, don't work in the edit page. But what can be useful is if you go into timeline and then you set the selection follows playhead. So that means that whatever the playhead is over, that will be selected. So then if you need to, if I want to cut just this clip, it'll only cut the top one. Or if you want to, you know, ripple delete, it'll delete that one clip, not anything else. Also, the audio and video only buttons don't work in the edit page. I think that's pretty much it. Let's try a transition. Let's see if a transition works. We're going to go here. We're going to add a transition. It does work. transition, but we don't get options. Oh, and another button that doesn't do what it should do. It works, but it doesn't work like it should. The move button, so if I hold split, it'll just slide. It won't move. So I don't know what the point of that is. Let's get back onto here. So slide and move do the same thing on the edit page for some reason. And if we go into other pages like Fusion or Color Page, it's really, like, really you're only going to use this for scrolling the timeline if you need to. So it does work on the other pages, but it's really just going to be for scrolling the timeline. You're not really going to be doing any editing, but you know, like I said, it's for the cut page primarily, and it about half works on the edit page. All right, so what do I think is missing? There's a few things I personally don't use ever, and there's a few buttons that I kind of wish were on there. For example, we have ripple delete, and I don't know why we couldn't just, you know, maybe hold is non-ripple delete or something. Having a delete without the ripple is handy sometimes if you just want to delete a certain clip but not move the rest of the timeline. That would be good to have, along with some way to select the track. Like I was saying before, using the multicam buttons works fine on the cut page, but it doesn't work at all on the edit page. That would be good to have as well, especially when you have, you know, stacked up clips like this. Not that this is really realistic, but if you do have multiple clips, I have no way of selecting the clip on track 1. I can't do anything to that unless I use my mouse. And sort of linked to that, you know, track select, it would be good if there was some way to select a clip without needing to have the selection follows playhead setting turned on. Because if I could, I don't know how they would do it, but, you know, maybe just having like, you know, arrow keys or something where you can select a clip without having to, you know, keep the playhead over it. Like if I want to maybe select this clip while my playhead's over there, I have to use the mouse and click on it here, do my thing. But then if I hit play again, it'll go back to selecting that. Or if I like scroll at all, it'll go back to selecting that. So it can be annoying at times to have that setting enabled. So I just wish there would be some way for it to be not enabled, but still give me an ability to select clips, because you literally can't select clips without it on. Like I mentioned before with the Bluetooth, if we go by Bluetooth, I'm actually just gonna unplug this now and it stays connected, so it's still gonna work. But as you can see, it is a bit laggy, definitely more so than when it's plugged in. And like, it seems to be okay here, but there is a slight delay. Now it's not too bad, like at the moment, but at times it can be a bit not ideal. The battery, however, does last a long time, so that's good. But there's also no way to see the battery life without having the software open. And you can't turn it off too, so it'll automatically turn on if it connects to the Bluetooth and DaVinci Resolve is open. So if DaVinci Resolve isn't open, you're fine. But if you open DaVinci Resolve and this is like, you know, on the shelf, it'll just turn on, the lights will turn on. So that's not ideal. It would be good if there was an on switch. That I feel like that wouldn't have been hard to add. And this last one's kind of a big one. So the scroll wheel, right? You can click it in. It works as a button, but nothing happens. It doesn't do anything. So what I wish it did is when you click it in, just like the Master MX3 from Logitech, when you scroll that fast, it unlocks and it has that free spinning scroll wheel, but if you do it slowly, it'll click. So if it had some sort of click built into that you could toggle on or off, and then each click being one frame, I think that would be really useful, because sometimes it can be a bit annoying. As you can see that as I let go, it's moved 2 frames. So it's hard to be really accurate with it when you let it go, if it just sort of bounces away. Whereas if you could go, all right, click, 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 and leave it, that I think would be ideal. So having a way that you can have it, you know, like this, or clicked, that I think would be the biggest improvement to this, more than anything else. So overall, what do I think about it, and is it worth it? I think for the price, if you don't already have Resolve Studio, yes, it is worth it. If you already have DaVinci Resolve Studio, I don't think it's worth the, you know, 300 US or 600 Australian that it is. So if you already have it, don't spend your money on this unless you really need it or want it. But if you don't have it, I think it is a good way to get the software and a little bit of extra hardware for not a whole lot extra money. It's really useful for cutting, you know, sequences of B-roll like this. Like if I was just gonna make a little sequence to music or maybe some sound design, something like that, and have just a B-roll sequence, or maybe have a voiceover and a B-roll sequence, like the series that I'm doing at the moment with my getting up early, becoming a morning person series, that I'll do a clip, which is basically a voiceover, and then I'll have all the other clips on top. So I'll just sort of I'll find the in and outs of all of them, put them all in the timeline, and then just put them on top of the voiceover, so then it all just sort of works. So it's good for that sort of stuff, or for cutting up, you know, a long A-roll like this is. This is gonna be, what, how long? Been recording for almost an hour. Are you serious? I do think the editor's keyboard would be a better deal if, one, you don't have Studio, and maybe you need a new keyboard, because it is a full keyboard plus almost all of these buttons, and the wheel actually does have a clutch in it, so it has a little bit extra functionality, but it has a full keyboard with labels on all of the default shortcuts, plus a few extra buttons, a numpad, everything. The only thing that this has that it doesn't is this middle section, and maybe a couple of the other buttons. But other than that, I think the editor's keyboard would be better if, you know, you need a keyboard for editing, or you do a lot of editing and you also are in the market for a new keyboard. And if it wasn't clear already, I think the wheel is the best part of this, because it is really nice to just be able to scroll through with this rather than using a mouse, or like, you know, hitting play and pause all the time. Obviously it does have the play pause button, you can just sort of play it and pause it as you go, but rather than, you know, clicking and trying to find the frame that you need, or like, you know, dragging through with your mouse, it is a bit more satisfying to use the wheel. And in some cases it is actually more efficient, especially with the scroll feature. You just like hit a button and just swipe across, you can go right back to the start in a second. But that'll be all for this one. Thank you for watching. Go watch the Cine EI video that I did. That was the last video. That was the first video that I edited using the speed editor. And subscribe, because the next video is going to be using the clips that I was editing today. So subscribe so you don't miss that one. Okay, bye.